Good evening. I am filled with pure serendipity to be a part of this meeting that can cause monumental changes to take place in this great city of Columbus and its surrounding communities. I am Tyree Walker, and I am a 16-year-old minister, and I attend Bishop Hartley High School, and in 2012, I lost my father to gun violence. Many have said that even in the absence of my father, I turned out okay because I did not take the paths of the streets. However, I do not stand before you as a person of privilege, but I stand before you as someone who is underprivileged like many because of the absence of our mothers and fathers due to gun violence. To know that my father, who was born and raised in the Linden community, was so inspired by his 6-year-old son, Dream, to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ, and because of one senseless and insensitive action that took place almost 10 years ago, my father does not get to see the fruition of that great dream. It causes me an even greater pain to see that this fault-filled violence continues and the number of children of gun violence victims rises every day. And so it is my prayer and my wish to all of those who I know and who I don't know in this great city of Columbus to fight the good fight, to end this senseless violence, and to help reconciliation between all citizens in this great city. And now I have the honor and privilege to introduce to some and to present to others Mayor Andrew Ginther.
Thank you, Tyree, and continue to lift you and your family up. Celebrate all of your great accomplishments, incredible resilience, but remember memory of your father as well. I want to thank City Attorney Klein, Council President Hardin, Chief Bryant, and the Division of Police, Dr. Roberts, Columbus Public Health, and of course, Tyree Walker. Thank you for joining us today as we share the latest on our sustained campaign to reduce gun violence in our community, as well as our efforts to combat illegal crime guns in our city. You've heard the stats before, 2 back-to-back record-setting years for homicides in 2020 and 2021, just like other cities across the country during this same period of time. And of the record deaths of our community endured in 2021, 91% of them involved the use of a firearm. The proliferation of illegal crime guns in and out of our city, as well as their prevalence in the hands of those committing acts of violence, are adding fuel to an already dangerous fire. A 2018 study by the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms and Explosives found that guns purchased in Ohio made up 18% of the guns recovered and traced from crimes committed in New York, a profoundly disturbing trend that has unfortunately persisted over time. In 2020, more than 2,700 firearms recovered by the ATF were ultimately traced back to our community. And then there are the guns our officers are recovering in Columbus. More than 1,500 so far this year alone. The guns you see on display here represent just 10% of the guns we've taken off the streets due to the incredible work of our officers. What isn't represented are the ghost guns coursing throughout our community at this very moment. These guns aren't marked with serial numbers. They're sold without background checks, often because they're privately assembled from kits, which makes them exceedingly difficult for law enforcement to track, but incredibly easy for criminals to acquire. The Department of Justice is working now to modernize the definition of a firearm, ensure these weapons are subject to the same regulations as traditional firearms, hopefully curbing their continued proliferation. We expect these changes to take effect in the coming months, and we're supportive of the DOJ's work to wrangle the threats posed by unserialized firearms. Despite the urgency of this issue and all the evidence piling up before our very eyes, the State House continues to move in the wrong direction. Stand your ground. now permitless carry, putting our very officers' lives at risk more than ever before. More guns, less training, fewer permits are precisely what we do not need at this moment, and will in no way prevent more senseless gun-related deaths from plaguing our neighborhoods and shattering the lives of our neighbors. These actions by the state undermine our ability to promote safety, security, law and order, and they do not represent viable solutions to the problems at hand. We need our leaders at the State House to do better. And if they refuse to move on gun violence in a thoughtful and serious way, then they at least need to get out of our way so we as a local city can do the things we know we need to do. Ban assault weapons, uniform background checks, red flag laws to keep guns out of the hands of those who present a danger to themselves and to others. We're committed to stemming the violence through apprehension, intervention, and prevention. And we're seeing some promising results. Homicides are down dramatically, 40%, compared to last year at this time. Our case closure rate is up significantly as well. But more needs to be done to take on guns, specifically because of the outsized role they play in the violence we're witnessing. To recap briefly, here are some of what we've done despite the constraints imposed upon us by the state legislature. Last summer, we formed a partnership between the Columbus Division of Police, the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of Ohio, and the ATF to collect, analyze, and distribute information regarding gun-related crimes. We've pooled our collective resources and we're utilizing leading-edge technology and evidence recovered from crime scenes to identify, apprehend, and prosecute the perpetrators of gun violence, as well as those who sell or supply those firearms in the first place. We know these crimes are being committed by an extremely small number of the local population, but we are steadfast in our commitment to rooting them out and prosecuting them to the fullest extent of the law. Our partnership with the ATF and the U.S. Attorney's Office is critical to our overall strategy to fight violent crime in Columbus, and that's why we'll be devoting an additional $250,000 for additional attorneys to assist in this effort. City Attorney Klein will speak more about this in just a moment. But I'd be remiss if I didn't once again urge the United States Senate to swiftly confirm Steve Dettelbach as the director of the ATF, which has been without a Senate-confirmed leader since 2015. Mr. Dettelbach, who's a Cleveland native, I might add, is uniquely qualified to lead this integral federal law enforcement agency, and I'm confident he will prove to be an invaluable partner in our ongoing efforts to reduce gun violence and promote community safety. That's why Council President Hardin and I worked to introduce and pass a resolution at Council last night supporting his nomination, and will continue to advocate on his behalf until he is confirmed. And I want to thank Senators Portman and Brown for their support of that nomination moving forward. Having every available resource at our disposal is crucial to our ability to bring down violent crime. Having a reliable, steady leader at the helm of the ATF will move us even further in the right direction. This is particularly pressing as we work in our city to address gun violence as a public health crisis. Last February, I tasked our health commissioner, Dr. Mysheika Roberts, with leading this work and coordinating with other city departments to devise a holistic approach for addressing this problem. The Columbus Board of Health has already convened to meet on this matter, and Dr. Roberts is here today to provide you with a more detailed update. We also formed the Columbus Alliance Against Illegal Guns, and we asked the DOJ to include Columbus in the National Firearms Trafficking Strike Force, which is dedicated to disrupting gun trafficking schemes across state boundaries. We need the full weight of the federal government behind us, but we haven't heard back from them on our request to join the strike force. Needless to say, we won't be waiting for them to act. I'll be calling upon all of our partners who have had a hand at this work to come together and create a similar solution that is custom-made for Columbus. The federal government does this work well. We'll aim to do it just as well, if not better, ourselves. Expect to hear more on that as those details are finalized. In the meantime, it's my pleasure to introduce our partner in all of our efforts to reduce gun violence in our community. Please welcome City Attorney Zach Klein.
Good afternoon, everyone. As the mayor indicated, I am proud to announce that my office, with the support of the mayor and the support of the city council, thank you, Council President Hardin, will be sending 2 full-time Columbus City attorneys to serve as Special Assistant United States Attorneys in prosecuting some of the worst gun violent offenders in our community. This is a really important effort. I've spoken to Ken Parker, the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Ohio. He's eager to accept the 2 new employees to come on board because the workload is so great. There's a reason why out in the community folks fear federal time, because it is significantly more than what can be done at the state level. So focusing on the worst of the worst offenders and having the resources available at the federal level to prosecute them to the fullest extent of the law is vital in getting the small number of people who are committing the most amount of crime and who are violent and dangerous in our communities off the streets. If you'll recall, when the city council and the mayor and the city attorney's office passed some of its more recent gun laws, namely the weapons under disability law as it relates to those who have a domestic violence conviction, there was a gap between the federal level that prohibits individuals with a domestic violence conviction from possessing a gun and the state level, which in a state like Ohio allows a person with a domestic violence conviction to possess a gun. We stepped in the gap to create a city ordinance that prohibits a domestic violent offender conviction from possessing a gun. And the reason we did that is because the federal level, the federal government did not have the resources to prosecute some of the worst domestic violence offenders who possess guns. Not because of the lack of the desire, but because of the lack of the ability. So adding 2 new full-time special assistant U.S. attorneys to the federal roster right here in the city of Columbus will expand their authority and ability to prosecute some of the worst of the worst. So thank you, Mayor Ginther. Thank you, Council President Hardin, for the funding. And at this time, turn it over to our fearless leader of the City Council, Council President Shannon Hardin.
Thank you, City Attorney, and thank you for all those under his leadership who have been on the front lines of truthfully trying to work within a system and within a state that makes it all too hard for local communities to protect our citizens. It should not be as hard, and we should not have to dedicate as many staff hours and attorney hours to pretzeling around to figure out how we should protect our community. You know, being in this room, you can sense how heavy it is, beginning with hearing from Tyree talking about the loss of his father, seeing these guns displayed in front of us, seeing our mothers standing in orange who have lost their babies, and thinking all too often that it could be another day, there would be another orange shirt around us. This stuff is heavy. We're talking about lives, we're talking about our residents, we're talking about our children when we talk about these guns. It's a cold reminder of the lost lives, crushed dreams, parents and grandparents who feel completely empty in sadness and sometimes rage. I've heard it too many times, in person and on the phone. I reach out to the family of each and every young person who is killed in our city. These phone calls are the worst part of my job, but it's important that they can tell their stories, to articulate their despair and their anger. And I almost always hear fear, the fear of being powerless to stop the gun violence. It's tremendously frustrating to listen to these stories and to know that our elected legislature in the State House is telling cities to do nothing, even if it would save lives by having common sense regulations on guns. Do nothing. Despite all that the NRA and the Ohio legislature is doing to promote the selling of deadly weapons, our team is not giving up. I appreciate City Attorney Klein and others for working on creative legal strategies to improve gun safety in our city. I also want to thank our Ohio Senators, Brown and Portman, who both supported bipartisan gun safety legislation. It certainly isn't all of what's needed to deal with the gun violence in Ohio, and not even close, but it is a step in the right direction. In Columbus, we are not just focused on guns. We are also continuing to do everything in our power to give young people choices, to walk away from violence and into the next phase of their lives. It is worth every dollar to create opportunities where kids can grow and learn new skills during the summer. That's why Council and the Mayor invested more than $16 million for youth programming just for the summer, for jobs, for summer camps and sports leagues. At the end of the day, keeping kids safe isn't an either or proposition. It's a yes and solution, and it takes all of us. But to make that happen, cities need to be able to do something, starting with common sense gun safety laws. At this point, I'd like to introduce the person who is on the front lines every day, leading our division and keeping us all safe. And it's our responsibility, truthfully, to make sure that she has the support and the division has the support so that they're not up against all this. And our police officers aren't up against all of this. And it seems like the state legislature makes that way too easy. It's now my pleasure to introduce our police chief, Elaine Bryant.
Good afternoon. Ever-changing technology and data continues to guide law enforcement as we look for the latest and best ways to fight crime and reduce violence. Using evidence-based policing, we have found two truths. A small group of people is responsible for a large percentage of violent crime in every community, and the community has demanded that our search for those subjects be targeted and specific to those engaged in the circle of violence. The data not only shows a small group of individuals is responsible for crime in our communities, but they use a small number of firearms to commit those crimes. In other words, forensic evidence has allowed us to identify the guns that are being used to commit the same shootings, which can be used to identify those who actually pull those triggers. The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives has championed the use of NIBIN to assist and direct firearm investigations. NIBIN is the National Integrated Ballistic Information Network. Prior to my arrival in Columbus, the Division of Police was unable to conduct NIBIN enhanced investigations due to several issues. Fortunately, in the last year, through the division's relationship with the ATF, we were able to arrange for the ATF's mobile NIBIN lab to be stationed in Columbus for the first 5 months in the year 2022. The lab, staffed by Columbus Police Task Force officers and ATF agents, increased the amount of firearms and evidence entered into NIBIN in such a fashion that the backlog of cases that existed prior to 2022 were all but erased. In addition, the mobile lab developed more than 1,100 leads, connecting evidence from different shootings to each other and the firearms used in each. Those leads help to solve cases and identify suspects. Even in instances in which the investigation is still open, we have been able to identify and charge violent crime suspects with unrelated weapon offenses while detectives complete their investigations, thus interrupting the cycle of gun violence. As a result of the successful deployment of the mobile lab, Columbus has been named as an ATF correlation center. This will allow our investigative leads to be processed faster and will result in those leads to be returned to our detectives for follow-up. These developments will put Columbus on the fast track towards a more evidence-based policing model that will serve its residents in a manner that protects neighborhoods from those who commit violent gun crimes. The Division of Police has also implemented a bi-weekly shooting review in which detectives from various units meet with state, federal partners, prosecutors, city attorneys, and other law enforcement officials to share information on recent shootings. And we collaborate to solve a shooting before it leads to any retaliatory violence. We know this work is preventing shootings. It is preventing deaths and injuries that change the lives of victims who survive and prevent the devastating knock at the door by our officers breaking the news to a family that their loved ones won't be coming home. Officers have recovered over 1,500 firearms this year alone. As you can see, there's some of these firearms here, with over 1,200 of those being seized. Our officers and detectives, they confront armed individuals every day, on the streets, during a traffic stop, serving search warrants. Whether it's the 10 guns seized during a search warrant in Linden on June 9th, or the 1 gun seized on Saturday night by uniformed officers assigned to the Short North who apprehended a shooting suspect. Our officers are using every tool at their disposal to make their communities safer. The stakes could not be higher. Every life lost to gun violence is a tragedy. For the victim, their family, the suspect's family, who will lose their loved ones to incarceration, and the communities who absorb the trauma, emotional and financial costs associated with these horrific crimes. I leave you with this. We are far from done. We will not accept the status quo. Working together with our partners, we will utilize every tool at our disposal to drive down gun violence, to lock up the people perpetrating this gun violence, and to protect the people we serve. Now with that, I'd like to introduce our Health Commissioner, Dr. Mysheika Roberts.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. Columbus Public Health is proud to work alongside our city partners and to help all of you to create our community, to make sure that it is a healthy and safe community for not only our residents, but also our visitors. So we're really happy to be engaged in this critical work. Looking at gun violence through the public health lens gives our collective efforts a different perspective, as well as work to address the crisis together. Not one agency, not one individual can solve this problem. It really takes all of us. There are no quick and easy fixes, unfortunately, to this work to answer gun violence. It's something, again, that takes time and it takes a lot of effort. But we at Columbus Public Health, and I know with our other partners, we're committed to working on this for the long haul, for the safety of our community. We need to find some long-term solutions that will make our communities not only safer, but healthier. Columbus Public Health, as the mayor mentioned, has engaged the Board of Health, and we are working with Mayor Ginther as well as Columbus City Attorney Zach Klein and his office to determine how public health can engage more deeply in this space while we ramp up our intervention efforts that we've started and that we want to continue. We started with educating the Board of Health in May of this year and again in June by having subject matter experts like Chief Bryant and City Attorney Klein and his colleagues educate the board on some of the fundamental things. What is going on? What does gun violence look like in our community? And how has the state preempted us from doing anything further to control gun violence in our community? We have one additional Board of Health meeting in July where we will hear from individuals who have been personally impacted from gun violence in our community. And then in August, we are planning a community forum, not only for our Board of Health, but for our community members to hear from national experts of what has worked in other communities to help control gun violence. Our team at the Center for Public Health Innovation continues to look at ways that we can reduce the disparities on gun violence in our community. As you likely know and have seen on the media, gun violence disproportionately affects people of color and disproportionately affects males. And that has created a decreased life expectancy for some of those, not only in our community, but across the nation. And so this is a health disparity issue as well as a safety issue in our community. So we've developed a few initiatives already, some of you which you've heard about and that you're familiar with, but I want to share a few more that we are doing now. We're really trying to create more resiliency in our community. So we have launched the More Life Partnership to provide trauma services through faith-based organizations in community of need in our city, including the Linden Life Fellowship and New Birth Christian Ministries. These services will include counseling and therapy services, linkage and connection to community resources, incidental supplies to communities in need, space rental for therapy sessions, outreach campaigns, transportation to therapy, as well as group sessions. This project will prioritize the communities and areas near physical churches, as well as those that with low utilization for mental health resources for outreach and support. Additionally, as I said, our Center for Public Health Innovation continues to evaluate what other cities are doing, and we will continue that. Another program in terms of the resiliency organizations or organizers that we're working with is to look at finding individuals who can serve as block leaders and key conveners to neighborhood-based interventions. This effort will include block-specific visioning and planning, support and referrals for social services, and assistance with urgent home repair needs through leadership development and collective efficacy building to improve living conditions for that block. Again, place matters, neighborhood matters, and if you feel more confident in your neighborhood and the way it looks and the way it feels, you're less likely to have violence occur in that neighborhood. But I want to remind you, as dedicated as we all are, not only those of us up here, but all of you, this change is not going to happen overnight. It's going to take time, but I am confident that if we all continue to work together, we will make a positive impact of gun violence in our community, and we will make it a safer community, and we will save lives. So I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Roberts. I do want to acknowledge Melissa, Mothers of Murdered Children, that have joined us here today, all your ongoing advocacy, passion, organizing. Thinking of you and your families and why this work matters so much. CDC last year reported that for the first time in the history of the Republic, the leading cause of death for children was firearms. Not traffic accidents, not a virus or sickness or cancer. Firearms. Imagine for a moment if there was a virus or a threat or an illness out there that disproportionately negatively impacted children or African Americans or other members of our community. What would we be willing to do differently to save their lives, to protect their families? Would we be willing to change the way we did things? Would we be willing to agree to sacrifice a little bit of freedom for safety, particularly when young people face the greatest risk? Would we develop a vaccine? Look at data and evidence, best practices to make sure the most vulnerable in our community lived? We would. We can do this too. But it's going to require all of us. The decrease in violence we've seen thus far this year, in large part, I credit to two things: the incredible work of our officers and law enforcement in this community, but also the public. The information, the tips, the information that's being shared with law enforcement helped us take 1,500 firearms off the street. Think about what we can do together. If we truly are willing to look in the mirror and acknowledge that gun violence is a public health crisis in this community and communities around America. Be happy to take any questions.
was wondering, can we get a little more information about some of the guns we're seeing around us? Were these all recovered recently? Some of these situations, whether it's you or someone else who can answer that?
Chief, you want to speak to that?
So the majority of the guns that we recover are handguns. It's been over 1,500 so far this year alone. Some of those are taken out of, like I said, search warrants. Some are taken off of people on traffic stops. Some of them are taken based on interaction with police during police runs. So the majority of the guns that you may see may be evidence-based, and that's, or we have a small percentage that are turned in, that we find guns that may have been lost and been recovered, so.
So are all these that we're seeing right now, are many of these recovered recently?
I can't tell you these specific guns right now, where they come from or what they represent, but these are guns that are in our possession.
Do you know where a lot of these illegal guns are coming from?
They're coming from different states, just like the mayor stated, some of the guns are being traced from other states that are coming into our, into Ohio, specific from other places, so.
That's why it's so important that if we don't become part of that trafficking strike force, that we create our own locally. Because there's, these firearms may very well have come other places around the country. I shared some stats of firearms that came from this community that were used in crimes in New York. We believe that effort can help disrupt and potentially slow down the proliferation of illegal crime guns in this community, but also communities around the country. But that's why that work is so important.
I'm wondering, especially as we've had some high-profile incidents involving teenagers, some homicides even, where those teenagers in particular are getting the guns.
That's a very good question, which is why we're tracking it and why it's so important that we're part of that correlation center. Because every gun that we recover, we are running it through NIBIN to determine where it's coming from and if it's been involved in other incidents. And we are finding that there are incidents that are occurring not just in Ohio, but from other states that are connected to these weapons.
What is that turnaround time for NIBIN?
It has been fairly quickly. I think, is Deputy Chief Ware here? Ware here? Could you?
It's currently, right now, it could be up to a week, a week or two. We've had it down to as low as 48 hours before in the past, and it kind of depends on volume of what's coming in and where we are. Like I said, the chief referenced in the talk earlier, the mobile lab helped a lot and got the backlog down, and we were getting it back to that more manageable within a week. We'd like to ideally get it down to 24 hours. But at some point, like we're at right now, is probably between 48 hours and 2 weeks, depending on the value, week to week.
And how much of an impact has that had, being able to reduce that turnaround time and try to prevent and solve other crimes?
Oh, it's been significant, which is why we can't thank the ATF enough in the partnership, because of that, we've been able to actually identify suspects and take them off the street, preventing recidivism and preventing other crimes that may occur if they were not off the streets.
Can you talk more about how Columbus being named one of the ATF's correlation centers helps specifically Columbus?
Oh, it helps because, again, we know that crime does not have any boundaries. And so us being part of that correlation center is almost like being a part of like an airport hub. So we're able to actually take those guns, put them into the system, and make a determination if that gun or that specific crime was committed somewhere else, and then we can actually track it back and be able to identify suspects, and then those detectives take that lead and they're able to actually build a case, and we've actually been very successful in locking people up based on information that came from the correlation center.
I think one of the reasons I raised Mr. Dettelbach's nomination again today was how critically important it is to have that permanent director at ATF. Because quite honestly, the state is MIA in this work, and in quite honestly passing laws against the wishes of prosecutors, police officers, first responders. It's so much more critical that we have Mr. Dettelbach confirmed. Grateful for Senator Portman. He and Senator Susan Collins of Maine were the only two Republicans initially that came out in support. There are others that have come out in support of Mr. Dettelbach. I've spoken with him just as of last week, and once he's confirmed, he looks forward to working with Columbus and other cities around the country to reduce gun violence, and really want to encourage folks for a speedy confirmation.
Mayor, we talked yesterday, but I was wondering if you could explain the significance of the pin you're wearing.
Yeah, so this is June is Gun Violence Prevention Month, and raising the color orange. Sadly enough, I learned just recently the color of orange was actually determined by a group of young people who lost a young girl in a park in Chicago as a result of a stray bullet. And the thought is orange is what hunters wear when they're out hunting, to make sure that other hunters and others are aware they're nearby, to try to help them stay safe. This is a way for us to acknowledge the loss, the pain and trauma that our neighbors are going through, but as a way to recommit ourselves to doing better and to keep fighting, even when it is challenging and overwhelming.
Could the city of Columbus have the power to ban things like you mentioned, ban, assault rifles and things of that nature? I know we called out state lawmakers quite a bit. Could the city do something like that?
We have, and because they have preempted us, they've taken the ability to ban assault weapons, demand universal background checks, pass red flag laws. And unfortunately, not only have they not done those things, they've preempted us and then done things that everybody in the law enforcement community opposed. Stand your ground, permitless carry. It is now incumbent upon our officers to ask folks that they're interacting with or that they've stopped to detain for questioning whether or not they're armed. It's no longer even incumbent on the individual. That's on our officers. And the risk that these types of measures put police, first responders, and the public at large at risk is unacceptable. But we'll keep fighting. The Coalition Against Illegal Guns, gun violence is a public health crisis. We're going to continue to not wait on the State House in Washington to make change, to do things that need to be done. Yeah.
All right, Jackie with Mothers for the Columbus Children. So with the implication, I think I understood you to say that more of the gun charges are going to be lifted up to the federal level. Is that what I'm understanding?
Yeah, I'll let the city attorney, he's the lawyer and the prosecutor, so I'll let him speak to that.
Hi, Jackie. Yes, by providing more resources to the federal government, then that gives them the ability to bring more federal charges. There will still be a vast majority of charges that will go through the state court system, just because of, unfortunately, the deluge of felonious assaults using guns, murders and other weapons-related charges and events that are occurring within Franklin County and the city of Columbus. So not every case is going to be taken federally, because the capacity simply isn't there to have the number of defendants that are committing the crimes in our community. But identifying the worst of the worst offenders, those groups that are very dangerous, that are extremely violent, who are have no regard for human life, that are willing to shoot into crowds while they're trying to get their target, that have multiple gun-related charges, those are the ones, in partnership with the Division of Police, the FBI, the ATF, the U.S. Attorney's Office, the County Prosecutor's Office, and in the City Attorney's Office, can come together and identify which ones should be elevated to federal prosecution, because that is where the biggest stick is. With that said, however, I think it's incumbent upon all of our prosecutors, and specifically our judges, to be tougher in sentencing and on bonds for those that are dangerous and preying victims in our community. It is a group effort. It is a group effort. And we have to be able to differentiate those, on the one hand, who are nonviolent, infrequent offenders who need help. And the criminal justice system is a way to help them get the help that they deserve. And we can use that as a tool to change people's lives, to allow them to be the moms and dads they want to be, or the sons and daughters they want to be. But on the other hand, we have very violent individuals who have no regard for human life. Those individuals need to be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law and put in prison. They have proven themselves by their actions of murdering children, of murdering innocent bystanders, ruining people's lives, and threatening the public safety of our community. And prosecutors need to make that case to the judges, and the judges need to hold them without bond, and they need to be sentenced to the fullest extent of the law.
There's no age limit on this? Like even minors can be charged up federally?
No, the federal government will not prosecute juveniles.
Also, I would like to thank all of y'all for making sure that our cries are not going unheard. So thank you all very much.
Appreciate you. We'll stick around for one-on-ones. Thanks, everybody. Thank you. Appreciate you. Thanks, Doc. Appreciate you. Thanks, Chief.